Welcome everyone to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. I am Bill Carell, and I am joined today again. Boy, I'm loving this. I've got Lisa Sheehan, I've got Jan Jeremias, and I've also got Ken Caputo. And we get together and we have conversations on a periodic basis. And the whole point of it is to bring some empowerment to you, our listeners. And we have an idea whether we're getting that done or not by whether or not we're actually empowering ourselves and each other. So I think with that said, I would just like to acknowledge it's a beautiful day out there. It's absolutely gorgeous, as a matter of fact. I want to say it's about 65 degrees. The sun is out. I've got rolling beds of violets throughout my lawn, purple, white, and pink. They are absolutely gorgeous. It's just a beautiful day to be here breathing. So, I think what I'd like to do is let's start off by just sharing something about ourselves that we probably have never said on the previous hundred and some odd podcasts. If you're comfortable doing that, it can be something very obscure. It can be something very small, but just one little thing to create some relationship with our listeners. I will start by telling you that I am grandfather of two absolutely marvelous young men. They are soon to be, well, they're 8 and 10 right now, and they're soon to be, I said eight, they're 9 and 10 right now. They're soon to be 9 and 11 in July. The older one gets a new birthday. So the whole point for me of everything that I do in life is always how do I forward the action with my grandchildren's future? And who would like to share next? Or would you like me to just play Supreme Master of all space and time? Lisa, I like your smile. I like everybody's smile, but you got my attention first.
I think keeping in the children vein, I don't have any children of my own, but the children in my life, I have a niece, two nephews, and a goddaughter that I brought into the world. I cut the cord, so that was kind of one of the biggest moments in my life. So I thought I'd share that.
Nice. Good for you. Anything else?
It's good for now.
Jan? Thank you.
Well, I also don't have kids, but I will switch and um, talk a little bit about the fact of, I feel like my contribution is very much to the animal kingdom and their ability to teach us so much and how much we can learn from them and how much we gain from them in when we have them in our presence. And on the human aspect is the value of, I want to say, older adults or older people. I'm hugely connected to older people. I love working with them. Thankfully, both my parents are alive and I'm very close to them. So it's just, what wisdom can I gain from them?
Perfect. Anything else?
Yeah.
And batting cleanup is Ken Caputo.
Trying to think of something I haven't already talked about. It's been a lot of episodes, but I don't know if I ever mentioned. So I served for 7 years in the Army National Guard. I was 11 Bravo infantryman, so running around the woods and stuff, and achieved the rank of E5 sergeant. So don't know if I ever mentioned that before, but there you go.
That's perfect.
I learned a lot about leadership from that experience. Yeah.
By being a good follower or by being a good leader?
Both. They're one and the same.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your service, by the way. I really appreciate anyone that puts the uniform on and takes the oath. So let's try this. So much going on in the world right now, and I'm kind of interested in looking past the current events to what comes next. After we're done doing what we're doing now, there are many people who I've talked to who are still very much focused on the legacy aspect of the living that they're doing right now, and how this will impact the people, like maybe not even anybody who's around today, but the next generation that's coming. Let's say my children's children's children. They're not here yet. And what kind of a world do we want and wish for them? And what would a world that works look like in their lifetime? So that's not too far out. That's probably within the next 10 or 15 years that those folks are going to be being born. Of course, people are being born every single day and at a very rapid rate. So, in terms of any type of thoughts on legacy planning, legacy living, the whole idea of the world that we are creating today, where it's either in our speaking or the structures that we build or the relationships that we create or what we leave behind, the footprints in the sand. Uh, we're leaving many of those, no doubt about it.
All I could think of when you said that, leaving footprints behind. Take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but.
So we're definitely having some issues with the internet today. And I missed the whole first part of what you said.
Oh,
The footprints, we heard that part.
right. Yeah, there's sayings when you walk into some wildlife areas or natural preserves, and it says, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints. So
Right.
what you said reminded me of that. So it's also what we don't leave behind. That's just as important. And I like to tell people, like, one of the most recent things I've done is I I helped crowdfund and purchase it's a machine that composts food food waste, plant waste, and even small plastics and turns it into usable mulch. So it's kind of a cool little gadget. It looks like the size of like R2D2, but it's uh
Yeah.
it's kind
Is
of a
this
cool
something
gadget.
that would be readily available for consumers?
Yes, it's called Lomi, Lomi,
Okay.
and you can find it on Facebook or I'm sure Google it.
Sounds wonderful. So we'll leave people a way to clean as they go.
Right. And the other thing you mentioned was the generation thing, and of course I've read a lot of indigenous culture, their takes on the world, and one of the things they always say is to think 7 generations out. So it won't even be a generation that you could have any access to ever. So to think in those terms of the children, but that many generations out, which is hard to do for people to think about because, like, who cares if I'm not here, kind of thing comes up. But you have to think beyond. I worry about the planet, and it's going to be here for 7 more generations.
Sure, and that's
Yeah,
kind of something that we imported in the last 25 years from the Eastern philosophies of having a 100-year plan. There are, that's a relatively new idea on this side of the earth, but there are many cultures that have thought in terms of 100 and 1,000 year plans. So
yeah. I was taught seven generations back and forwards, so that you're like at this kind of waypoint between these two other, I guess you call them data points on a map, and thinking in terms of that, it leads to some interesting meditations and stuff. It's kind of cool.
So why don't we stay there for just a quick heartbeat? I'm kind of interested in exploring what that might look like. The notion of 7 generations. How would that get expressed in conversation? How would that get expressed in terms of people's lifetime goals, the goals for this decade, the goals for this month and this week? What would that sort of look like to people if they're going to be taking into consideration and it's an interesting thing because Elon Musk. I love this quote from him saying every decision that he makes is bounced against the notion of, will this put me closer to getting to Mars or further away? So that's probably not 7 generations, but it certainly can project to 7 generations when you consider most of the people that go to Mars, they probably won't come back.
I think it's that simple of a process too. Like what he did is apply it to going to Mars. If every action or organization or um, even a simple thought process will how will it affect generations out? I mean, will it affect them? Um, how can I apply it that far out?
Yeah. So, Jan, when you take a moment and like reshape your mind around, you know, 7 generations backwards and 7 generations forward, you kind of almost have to pay better attention to what's going on right now, don't you?
Yeah, and I was thinking that, if you do something with a pure heart, you know, that's truly heartfelt, a pure heart that that, I think it's automatic almost. It's inherent that you're honoring almost probably 7 generations earlier. And
Yeah.
obviously, something done like that, you're honoring what's going forward or going to come forward or after you. So, you, I was just on a workshop, and thank you everybody for accommodating me on running a heartfelt business. And that's what we were talking about is like, and so that's what I think about, like if we want things to last and we want things to you know to just be around and to honor that heartfelt connection, we're going to honor everything involved, meaning the earth, what we do, the people involved. Just so I think it's inherited at all.
It's an interesting concept. So I've been doing my business. I incorporated in 1989, pulled the trigger and signed all the last documents in 1990. And the main reason that I started my own company is because I thought I could do it better than anybody I'd ever worked for. It would be interesting to go back and interview some of the people that have worked for me over the last 30 years, or actually almost 32 now, 32 and some change. And the whole idea was working in companies that had a history of being polluters or had a history of doing things that were not necessarily good for the earth, or doing things that were kind of cutthroat and not necessarily good people. You know what I mean? And the whole notion of going through the 1980s, I got laid off or fired from 4 different jobs, but the firing was pretty much a layoff. I was insubordinate, and I deserved to be fired, but I kind of engineered it. So the point is that when I got into a situation like that, I wasn't sleeping well at night, and I thought, what would it be like if the energy that went into building the company started with really, like, no kidding, taking care of customers in an extraordinary way and making sure that the employees were just as well cared for, and they were aligned with, this is what they need to be doing for a living, because what else would they do except for serve people? There probably weren't a whole lot of companies in 1989 and 1990 that were talking that way. I mean, I didn't know of many. Most of them were Gordon Geckos, where greed is good.
That's why I like what Ken said about 7 generations back, and it's an interesting perspective too, because uh, healing past trauma within your own life, and then um, also forgiving, because they know not what they do. We weren't smart. I mean, smoking was healthy for you at one point, and polluting the
Doctor
rivers was,
recommended, yes.
yeah, polluting rivers was the way. They thought, oh, it'll regenerate itself. It'll take care of it.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But that we didn't know any better. So I think sometimes people look harshly on the past, thinking, how not smart we were, and but it was just the times. So I think healing that trauma too, and just moving forward instead of like pointing fingers to blame. Just like how can we move forward and make it better, not repeat that mistake, or how do we even improve our improvements? you know.
Well, Lisa, that just reminds me of the statement like know better, do better. You know,
Yep.
so I think of along that line were like canned vegetables, you know, which were great, like in the
Really worked.
60s and 70s when I was a kid, but then realizing now that I would like never buy a canned vegetable if I could help it, like I'm gonna buy fresh and whatever. So, it was kind of like what was in fashion and no one knew better.
So you want to know the truth? I had canned corn for dinner last night. And I think the main reason that I do, I mean, I always get these little cans of corn and prepared mushrooms. Although I cook it all from scratch almost every single day, so it takes me an hour every evening to make my dinner between the knife work and the preparation of the gozintas, which I call the little sub assemblies that make the whole thing really really kind of special. But I agree with you. Were it not for canned food, my family of 8 people in the 1960s and 70s would probably never have eaten.
Exactly.
So let's explore the difference between having a wise saying to examine and then experiencing wisdom as a result of it. Um, and I'll ask this rhetorical question because I don't know if anybody is really tuned in to like the 3 million Navajos that live on the reservation or at the Four Corners, or the other Native Americans now that also have all of those really marvelous sayings that regard all of us as one. It's like every advanced religion, in my opinion, the Buddhists, the Native Americans, they all believe that we're all part of a super system, and nobody stands apart from it. Which I think is brilliant. I really do. And how many of them actually can put that into practice in their daily lives? How many of us can put that into practice in our daily lives?
We can all put it into practice. The thing is, even now, we don't really know any better now than we did 7 generations ago. We've learned, but we don't know what we don't know. So every decision you're making right now is going to have second and third order consequences. you know
Yeah.
so like the heartfelt business really resonates with me because that's been my mission for 30 years, and there are a lot of heartfelt decisions and beliefs that broke when stress tested by humans being humans. And oh, this is we're going to be one big happy family, and then someone isn't, and they're selfish, or you screw up and people get hurt. And so now it's kind of like what Lisa was saying. Where's the like for me, I'm like caught up in this idea of navigating. If you teach people how to more effectively navigate based on the result, whether the consequence was good, bad, intended, or unintended, now at least you can continue to have like movement and evolution. But isn't it interesting? I mean, yeah, so Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. What if 3 generations from now that results in the destruction of the planet? He's not intending that. He doesn't mean that to happen, but what he doesn't know that it won't. So at some point, you have to be able to look at where you are and navigate towards, that resolution. It struck me as you were talking about Buddhism, because one of the tenets of that is bodhicitta, which is pretty much, your intention is to look beyond yourself to the greater good of all sentient beings and to serve that first and foremost.
Hmm.
And they recognize most people aren't doing that. They're not even where they could do that. They're in that mode of, you know, self preservation, self cultivation, whatever it is. I'm not there's no judgment here. It's just where we are in our place, but where we are in that perspective influences our decisions, and that is going to make it very difficult to achieve some semblance of altruistic balance, I guess you could say. So it feels like the wisdom you acquire is by making the what you think is a good decision, having it turn out in a way that may or may not be what you thought it was going to be, and then how do you move from that, and how do the people around you align or not align with how you move through that, you know? It's complicated. It's probably why we're all so messed up.
Well, it's the dance. It's really the
Yeah,
dance, and everybody gets tired of other people messing up their experiments, you know? I'm supposed to be doing this, and it's supposed to yield this result over here. And I think it's powerful what you're saying, because the folks that are awake and have decided what they want to do with their lives, like, I know people that knew when they were 5 or 6 years old they were going to be firemen, and they did it, you know, or going to be a school teacher, or going to be a nurse or a doctor, and they did it. And then there are, like, the most of the rest of us, we just kind of like bounced off of things for a while and ended up falling into something that seemed like it was, you know, less dangerous than other things, you know, and had a pretty good group of people that were, semi heading in the same direction. And at the same time, if I were objectively looking at all of the wise things that, like, for instance, that come out of the Navajo traditions. Um, I've bought books. My wife's bought books. We're real interested in all of it. But along with that, they have one of the highest rates of obesity and, of disease related to, to obesity and alcoholism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And wouldn't it be cool if somehow they could spontaneously just get reconnected to 7 generations back and 7 generations forward? Not like there's a particular um, difference in them. I think it's what they're experiencing is true for most cultures across humanity, that are in similar circumstances. I think you see those kinds of things breaking down in poorer countries in Africa and places where their resources are not readily available, like the way they are for us that live near cities and that sort of thing. But I just think, um, the idea of you struck me with this, the 7 generation thinking and living, and the whole idea of a legacy, not a legacy that you're leaving, but the legacy you're passing on. You know, the legacy that lives on through us in our daily lives as we go about our business, and that might have a little bit of assistance in terms of telling people these things that you're doing, to your body that are not healthy for you. You might want to take a look at that. This is not something that you want to be your generational legacy to the next 3 or 4 generations. This is something that's correctable through behavior and through choice. And what if it were correctable, through behavior and choice? And, and I talk about these folks not because there's anything in particular about them, but I see that being a doable size for transformation for a group of people in a culture. Does that make sense?
I
yeah,
think that would work. I mean, well, I was watching something not that long ago, and they were talking about the way our diets have changed has resulted in adult diseases affecting children.
Yes.
So if we could stop doing that and then looking 2 to 3 generations out where we could reverse that process
Hmm.
by us eating healthier and and passing that down to the generation that is in the age group to have children, and so that it starts younger instead of we just figured this one out. I didn't know about. I mean, you kind of knew every to me it seems like every decade or so there's new information about it, and it's probably changing daily. Actually, it's not even every decade, but as to
Yeah.
what's good for your body, and I know it changes, and you have to figure out what's good for you. But we all know, like the more whole a food can be that you eat is the better thing, you know. And I the thing I've said lately to people is you can eat whatever you want as long as you make it yourself
Right.
from scratch, you know. So I
I
mean, I
think
think go ahead.
so. No, I was going to say a telltale sign is that, when they start to do studies and children born now will not live as long as their parents. And that is, that's always scary to me because for years and years, I mean, it was the reverse that, children born were going to outlive their parents because in general, the thought was that people were healthy, the newer generations were healthier. And just the fact that it's now reversing to me says something. That and the fact that for me, I see it reflected in the animal world where animals get the same diseases we get now.
Yeah.
Where their diabetes rates are just as high, their cancer rates are higher, if not higher. And you sit there and you think to yourself, well, you know, they're around people with poor habits or poor lifestyle habits, which are then affecting them, and so you well, it's true, as my friend said to me, they're not standing in the drive-through at McDonald's, the dog's not behind the wheel, you know.
And yet I've seen people buy a Big Mac and feed it to their retriever. It's like, what? Yeah,
Exactly.
no wonder they're getting sick, ladies and gentlemen. They're using the same food techniques you are.
Exactly.
I think it's really powerful to think of that. And the other thing that you mentioned too, um, it applies especially so to folks on the reservation, where most of their foodstuffs for 50 or 60 years came from the federal government. There was nobody, bringing in truckloads of fresh fruit and vegetables and all that sort of thing. No, these were 50-pound bags of flour and lard. And guess what? One of the most traditional things, and it's now the same in other territories around the Pacific and Hawaii and that sort of fry bread. Are you familiar with fry bread? It's a little bit different than fried dough, when you go to the boardwalk at the beach. And it's probably got just the same amount of lard calories in it as well. But that becomes a staple and a mainstay. I got to talk to Elon. I think we can fix this. I really do. Mars shot is a good idea, but let's go to the four corners and let's make life different, better, and livable, like survivable, for 3.5 million folks that are there. I don't know. What do you think? It seems doable to me.
I think just as we're talking about it, it just struck me another Buddhist connection, just because I have a couple of people that I've been talking to that are kind of, connected into that world. And they were talking about, I think this speaks to the wisdom part again. So
Yeah.
you have a monk, it's in a very controlled environment, where, they're reading the Dharma every day, they're doing their meditations, da, 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 da. Then they come over to the West and they lose their minds. Like completely, they're exposed to an environment where you would think, oh, they'll just float through. They won't experience attachment or this or that. But it's all of these things, these variables that they've never had to deal with that all of a sudden are present. And some of them do not do well in that environment at all. Like, it gets pretty bad. So, and I was kind of fascinated by that. And I'm sure it's not all of them, but it's just once again being aware. So you reach out to Elon, you say, "Hey, let's fix this." But then you go in and what are all of the variables that you can't account for? And what I'm always very vigilant against is if you've experienced some success in and you're trying to translate that, you may have some assumptions that you make and blind spots as to how simple it will be
Yes.
to just do it again in this new environment without, and you don't know what you don't know. And no matter how hard you try to do risk assessment and figure all that out, something's going to screw it up. And then who are you in that moment? And so it's been interesting to me. I think even in business, it's finding people to support us and partner with from a leadership position who as best you can, you get to know who they are in the moments when the system is stress tested. You know, are they going to assign blame? Are they going to deflect? Are they going to defend? Or are they just going to nod their head and say, "Yep," and pull up their sleeves? And what do we do about it? How do we work this through? And yeah, so it's just kind of interesting.
It's a good word. It's a good word, and you can look that up. But I think interesting is when it engages your curiosity in a focal sort of a way. The being interested in something necessarily means that it not only is like a shiny object, but it's a shiny object with potential outcomes that are worth getting more information about. And
My
it
mentor
all
always said, "Let it be interesting, not important."
Yes, 100%. Yeah, that's the Stephen Covey four quadrants as well. That's where you want to play. Important and not urgent.
Mhm.
So back to thinking in terms of individual human beings. If you were to close your eyes right now and imagine, a little boy and a little girl that are going to live here in like 7 generations, what do we consider a generation? Like 25 years? So that's what, 175 years from now? It's actually not that far away when you stop and think about it.
Mm.
And you can wrap your mind around that. 175 years ago, well, you stop and think about it. We really had a whole lot of this country that we didn't know much about geographically and terrain wise, and there wasn't a lot of population that difficult to get to. What sort of things will be interesting to us? What sort of things will engage and capture our intellect that we become curious about and we study? That same sort of first step in consulting on the reservation when we go there, we've got to do the baseline survey. We have to capture our own data and not use the other data that's available from past successes. I so agree with you, Ken. It's like what they say, the worst are educated people because they are blind to the things they have yet to learn. They think they know something.
I think there's a dip that's I've heard that recently, and I, there's this kind of dip where if you stay with something long enough, education can be a very powerful. Being educated on something, you just got to know whether or not they've come to the place of being comfortable with saying I don't know again. Because that's when you don't know anything, it's easy to say I don't know. Then you start to learn, you do your research on YouTube or whatever, and you get really passionate about the things you're learning. So so then you feel like and you want to inform it's that whole Dunning-Kruger thing. You want to inform, but the most knowledgeable people I've been fortunate enough to work with are always curious and understand that they have a lot of blind spots and there's a lot that they don't know. And I remember one of my friends who's a martial artist, after 40 years of training, he said he learned a new kick from a 4-year-old and just watched them do it. And it was, just got out of his own head and all the things that he'd learned. And instead of corrected it, he was like, "Why'd you do it that way?" And actually learned something about it that, ended up helping, older martial artists who were over the age of 40 and starting to have some hip changes in the hip and flexibility. And it was a really cool thing. So he was open to it. He was an incredibly knowledgeable expert who had found his way through that dip and into the place of being comfortable with not knowing everything and using his knowledge to now be responsive to those variables as they come into play.
Yeah, that's so important. You know, and I wonder, are we teaching our children to question in a powerful way? Are we teaching them that once you've learned a certain amount of things that you have to defend those? You know, are we teaching what are we teaching children?
Depends on who the teacher is.
Yeah, and there's a system at work here, shall we say. What is that system generating in terms of I don't know where I would go to get an answer to my question, to be honest with you. You know, in 2022, I don't know who I would ask. I could probably ask that same question of 25 different people in education right now and get a range of different answers.
Well, I guess the thing that I'm thinking about is Ken was talking about that with his, with the person who went and learned a new move from a 4-year-old is, this ability to be curious is, inquisitive. And I think I look at that from my yoga practice because, even though you do yoga in a class, it's still very individual. And so, am I curious about my own body and what it can do? Am I curious to understand and to recognize and to, that's why the practice never gets boring to me because I always learn something. I always experience something different. And, to me, are we passing even that idea on to our children? It's like, that ability of being curious and inquisitive and, because I think that leaves the door open for that whole idea that you don't know everything. And there's always more to learn and more to experience, even with something, if you learn something totally about a subject, there's still more that you do not know.
Sure.
And there's still more to be curious about. So are we teaching, I mean, for me, I grew up, I was a big, we spent a lot of time outside. There was this whole idea of being inquisitive and investigatory and curious and learn, kind of that whole experience. And so, pass that on to your children, like get them out, you know, get them out in nature. I think nature teaches us a lot.
I think we've changed our interaction from like parent to child to that kind of that parents aren't perfect, and I think a lot of people that I read their motivational books on how to handle the next generation is to not lie to them and tell them like parents aren't perfect and they're human beings and that you don't have to be either to provide your to be a role model for them to show them if you make a mistake in life there's ways to correct it or this is how you grow and all that other. I know I grew up but I'm thinking my mother was perfect until she cried once. I never saw her cry until my sister eloped. And then it was the floodgates opened up. But I thought she was perfect and never cried and never nothing ever bothered her. And then that's that being a role model can wreak havoc on your own life. Going, well, my mother was perfect. Why can't I handle all this stuff? She did everything.
It's a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just too much pressure. And I
They
think
pretty much had us snowed, didn't they?
yeah, but not to a beneficial aspect. For the children themselves. That's why counselors make so much have so many clients. We're all
Well,
trying
if
to
we're
do.
looking, isn't it interesting though, if you're looking back on generations, it's kind of like, you know, canned food or the education system from the 50s and 60s. It's you've got an exploding population. How do you mass produce,
Mhm.
and preserve food? How do you mass produce and preserve education? Like it's so they came up with solutions and there were unintended consequences, second and third order consequences, and then you relook at it. So it's interesting. I mean, you know,
We
you
use the
know,
food analogy here. These folks are eating from the center of the store, man. They are not buying from the outside walls of this store. There's nothing organic going on. It is totally canned and it is designed to put everybody through the same experience, some faster, some slower. I love what you're saying, Ken. What if the whole idea of how you teach a group of children to think were to be completely re-examined?
mhm. And also, how do you get to a place where you can safely ask the question without triggering all of the yeah buts or the defenses? Like, for example, how do you how do you make the healthier, um, you know, like fresh foods, like fruits and vegetables, less expensive than the bag of Fritos. Like how do you flip that model so that it's, I mean, I remember years ago reading, I think it was in Chip Heath's book Switch. And it's just talking about they got a whole town to lose weight by making the low fat milk cheaper. So people just bought it and then that's what's in their refrigerator. So that's what they're drinking. So is there a way to make, fresh squeezed orange juice less expensive than a 2-liter bottle of Coke? I don't know. But, that conversation, whenever you hear conversations like that come up, from what I've seen anyway, it turns into all of this, well, don't take away my freedom to choose this or that, or, it becomes about something else instead of just like Lisa said, curiosity. Are you curious about, you know, just could there even be an answer, and can we have that discussion without, all of the clutter getting in the way of it? So, what would it look like to have a classroom full of 30 children all able to learn in the way that's most effective to them? That's the question I ask on a daily basis and have for almost 30 years now. I don't have an answer yet.
So
But,
we need to get somewhere around 7 to 10% of a population being interested in that approach, and
yeah,
then
well, I
that
think
that starts to
there,
turn the culture. You know.
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because there are people interested in that. They just quickly get defeated because it's so much easier to just criticize, you know, an idea or puncture it. And I've faced that. I've gone into, businesses and schools and, try to bring that, just that possibility up, and I just feel deflated very quickly because all I hear is the resistance to why, and they have every reason to feel that way. They're tired, they're overworked, they're stressed, they feel defeated, so they just pass that on to you. So, so then you end up saying, you know what, I'm not going to pour my energy into that. I became a martial arts teacher because I didn't believe I could actually make a difference in kids' lives in the public school system. So I needed to go into an entrepreneurial environment where I could be myself and have them for years and be able to test things and, do it that way. So I basically walked away from making a difference in public education because I didn't think it would work. I didn't want to put the energy into it.
We had those conversations, and it really, that whole idea, the notion of asking questions about the status quo in certain types of institutions, it's a guppy in a shark tank. It's got no life expectancy whatsoever. First
Mhm.
of all, you have to train people into even how to have that conversation, which is a lot of work.
Yep.
The kids get it far faster than than the adults do. They will warm right up to that. If you tell kids you are going outside, we're not going to be looking at books today. Books are going to be withheld from you for a little while because they're very special, and you're going to have to earn the right to read books. We're going to have you just look at pictures. We're going to have, this is the thing that's the craziest for me, is it's almost like kids today that I've talked to regard reading books like punishment. Like, this is, cruel and unusual, something for them to do. The whole notion of having books that they call them, what do they call them, paragraph books, books that have chapters, as opposed to what is that, um, something novels, pictorial novels or something. They're comic books, right?
Oh,
And
graphic novels,
graphic
maybe.
novels. Yes, thank you. Between us, we make a whole brain.
Well, as Ken was talking about, the education system, and I'm thinking about the world I came from, which is in the health business, like the health world,
Right,
and to have people change from the mindset of, wellness care versus sick care.
right.
And, and the fact that, yes, you can take something that's going to get rid of your headache, but why are you getting headaches? Like, and addressing root causes versus symptom relief, which is another whole mindset change for people because, a lot of people that live in this country are very used to getting things yesterday. So
Yeah.
if it's going to take a long period of time to figure out, they don't want to, they don't want to do the work. And for, and in the health business, if people are healthier, you know, no offense, but they don't make as much money,
Exactly.
you know.
Jan, that's fascinating that you say that, because I found, like, when I go into the doctor, which is very infrequent, it's mainly the only preventative things they want to talk about are screenings, your preventative screenings or whatever. And I don't even bother trying to talk to them about well-being, and health span as opposed to lifespan. And then I even went and started looking for like functional medical practitioners, and the majority of them, they're selling supplements.
Yes.
It's just they're doing the same thing in a different way. And again, they want to tell you what thing you should do that had a study in yeast or mice or whatever, that's not really even proven in humans yet, but maybe. But it's a $1 trillion industry now. So what do you end up doing? You end up kind of giving up and just doing the best you can. And now we're back to what Bill said. I mean, you don't even know who to ask, you know? So, and it's very, very difficult, you know?
Well, I'm navigating that world a lot with what I do and
Yeah, I'm
personally.
sure.
And it's a lot of work to find out and to delve and to be willing to try on your own and to look for the information. Like my friend always says to me, being well is a full-time job.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like that, because I feel like, the information out there that's publicized is very skewed in one way, one direction or another, because there's always basically somebody who wants to sell you something.
Well,
Mhm.
you
Usually.
know, we've come
Yeah.
up with a really brilliant metaphor for all the institutions. Every last one of them has found a way to systemize canned corn, you know?
That's right.
It's like, what's the easiest for us to replicate? What's the easiest for us to make sure we're being fair in what we're giving people? What's the easiest, from can to table, and then they're not going to care once they've gotten hooked on this is how you do things, right? So you got in the medical industry, you've got it in healthcare, which I think is different than the medical industry. We 80% of what we want to do now is to keep our population medicated all the time on something or another that distances them from the life that they live. It's just amazing to me how readily our culture will adopt the next quick easy thing that really doesn't improve the quality of their life, but they can get it done faster.
Bill, what just struck me as you're saying that is there's also, so yes, and when people are faced with a choice, how often is it easier to just take the pill? Like, I remember when I was 40, I, with as athletic as I started getting a little pre-hypertensive. My blood pressure was going up. And the doctor was like, it's probably, just genetic based on your lifestyle and everything. So we'll just put you on, pressure medication. And I'm like, can I maybe change my diet or something? He's like, well, you exercise so much, you're healthy, all your measurables, your blood's good. So I was like, you know what? No, thank you. And I stopped eating things. I ate a lot of calories because I was exercising a lot. So I cut out like all processed meat and salty foods, just reduced sodium. And a year later, my blood pressure was perfect and has been since then, you
Yeah.
know? But it also means I have to constantly not eat things that I really like to eat, and it would be so much easier to just take the pill. you know so and if people want the pill, guess what, they're going to keep making the pills. And so how
Mhm.
much of it is our own doing, and obviously, I was trusting who I thought was an expert and a professional to help me make these decisions, and he wasn't, and is not my doctor anymore either, you know. But so there is that part of it. But now you're back to what Jan said. It's really hard to figure this all out for yourself and then do the work every day for your whole life. I remember someone saying to me, I really have to exercise for the rest of my life. And I'm like, yeah, you
Well,
kind of do. You,
and I'm where you are, Ken, because I've had that exact experience where like I've gone and they've recommended something and I've been like, I remember when I was like 26, my cholesterol's through the roof, and the doctor said, I'm going to put you on statins. And I'm like, I'm 26, you know, and looked at all my other medical conditions, which one of them causes high cholesterol. And I thought to myself, I'm not doing this. And then years later, when they started to like differentiate good cholesterol and bad cholesterol or whatever, going to a doctor, and he
uh,
said to me, your good cholesterol is so high that you will never have a problem. And I thought to myself, I would have been taking statins for like 40 years or 30
yeah,
years then. And I was just like, this just doesn't make sense. I ended up leaving that doctor like you. I said, okay,
yeah.
this isn't the person for me. But some people don't know any better or don't want to do the work. I mean, it is work, to do it.
I knew someone
Yeah.
who was on minocycline for 20 years to keep they're on an antibiotic for which you shouldn't be on for more than, and just they just
2 days.
refilled
Yeah.
a prescription, and then
Yeah.
it was for their complexion, I guess, and they went off it and had all kinds of issues for about 6 months, and then it cleared up and they're fine and they have so many less complications. But it was just unquestioned until someone questioned it and said, hey, do you know what antibiotics actually do? And and then when they knew, then they were willing to at least go through an experiment to try to see if they could make a change, which was hard, but on the other end of it, so it's interesting. Again, it's complicated,
Mhm.
you know?
It not only is it complicated, you can't get the answer from one place and trust that the answer you're getting is holistic and complete.
Yeah,
You really have to live a lifetime in order to figure out where it was you screwed up listening to the wrong people.
yeah. Well, and I mean, what had happened if I had done that, changed the dietary habit and a year later my blood pressure hadn't gone down? Then I was wrong, and now I have to figure out, something else, but I also had to change behaviors for a year. It was, yeah, it was probably 6 months, but it was really a year before it was
Yeah.
pretty much stable. But that's a lot to ask of people,
Mhm.
when they're just, and it's like even the food thing. I think a lot about, you know, people who are eating the things they're eating that are inexpensive and non-perishable. How many of them, I've never experienced fear of actually being able to put food in my children's mouths. Like I've never lived that. I've gotten close a few times, but I've never actually wondered how I was going to feed, myself, or even worse, my family.
Yeah.
So when you're forced with those decisions every day, what does that do to, that's a variable that I can't even begin to understand. So I'm not going to sit here and preach about eating healthy
Mhm.
when, I don't understand the world they're coming from, the decisions they're being forced to make, you know? And until I do, I can kind of share a little bit about what's worked, but then I'm not going to pass any judgment, on what they're doing, or the system that's kind of put them there, you know?
It kind of, turns out that there are so many things that you ingest during the course of a lifetime that turn out to be addictive. It's
Mhm.
not a surprise that people who go to McDonald's 3 times a week are doing it. This is by intent. I mean, it's every bit as bad for you as smoking cigarettes, and they're doing the same thing to make sure that you're getting the sweet and you're getting the salt, and that you have to have more of that. Your body demands it. So I'm just saying to you, it takes mavericks. If you think about, like, for instance, if we were taking the metaphor of an automobile factory, they have only changed when the competition got so bad they had to either go out of business or borrow intensively from the government and retool everything. If you stop and think about it, they there's not been anybody except for one guy that I know recently, and a couple of people over the last sort of 120 years or so, who started out with a design for, I'm going to do things completely different than anybody else in my industry. One was Henry Ford, and the other one was Elon Musk. And what Elon did is he sat down and he said, I am going to take every last nickel that I have and I'm going to concentrate on building a car that I don't have to sell very many of them in order to make money. So he came out with a $125,000 model. He was able to sell enough of those. Then the plan from day one was the intermediate $70,000 model next, and then the everyman Model T last. Different order than Henry Ford, but Henry was able to compete with people based on doing the same thing over and over again and having very low skilled people do it. And in this situation, you've got how many companies that are making electronic vehicles right now?
Mhm.
And how many of them are making a significant number of vehicles? There's nobody making as many electronic vehicles. GM's not doing it. Toyota's not doing it. Ford is not doing it. They've got plans to do it. And all of them are government subsidized. And a guy who just conducted himself for profit over the last 20 years. I don't know. There's something to learn about that in terms of destroying the canned corn, systems. I, I can actually see myself making some T-shirts, destroying a can of corn. Like the metaphor of buying from the outside wall and being willing to take the time to learn what's good for you and what you can make yourself. I don't know. I get my life out of cooking for one person every day. My wife eats a completely different diet, and it's almost like we're both, in different worlds. We Most of the time she'll get her stuff made first, and then I'll get mine made, 10 or 15 minutes after she's done and back out here. But the point is, people have to be interested. And I love that word because, like, curiosity and interest have to go hand in hand. You got to come at this with a healthy dose of what's up with this. And the next part of it is going to be, what part of it do I want in my life and what part of it do I not want in my life? I think if more people do stuff like that, as opposed to getting trained how to be satisfied with the little bit of knowledge they've acquired up to this point, and then sharing that as a belief system with other people that have been trained and taught the same thing. I think God agrees with me. So in the meantime, here we are, and really the only thing that we can do to spread light to the rest of the world is to inspire people to be curious, and be curious to the point where you actually are engaged with ongoingly getting more information and constantly incorporating that into the work that you do to have the best life possible, so that you got something to brag about, when it comes time to get to the pearly gates. And you can go right in with on a skateboard, because they're going to open the doors right up for you and go, you of all people, man, we've been watching what you've been doing down there. It is really freaking cool, and welcome. Maybe that'll happen, or maybe you'll get knocked off your plan, and then you'll have to go back and figure out where you were again and then start over. And because it's never a straight line from here to there for some reason in life.
I have to laugh because it reminds me when I was in grade school, we used to sing a song called "Oh, You Can't Get to Heaven"
Yes.
on a pair of skates because we rolled
Yep.
right by those pearly gates.
Right. Well, in Boy Scouts, we had a few that were kind of off color.
Yeah, no, they was totally on color.
Can't get to heaven in a can of beans,
Can of
because
corn.
Lord ain't got that many latrines. So the whole notion of legacy and looking back seven generations, looking forward seven generations, lifetime quest. I'm constantly saying, now what's the next best possible thing for me to get interested and curious about? as opposed to the next thoughtless thing that gets done because it seems to be the next step in a succession of things that have been going on. And I just wonder, how much more joy and how much more self-expression people would find in having that sort of life where they're not comparing themselves to other people, but they're comparing themselves to who they were this morning, and how much further they are behind than they intended to be, and how much more they learned.
I think like we were doing every week, I think we come down to the same kind of conclusions. Like start with yourself, and see how you make small changes in your life, and people will notice and take on what fits their lives, and maybe step by step will make the world a better place.
Well, see, the neat part of that too, Lisa, is that you've got the best chance of listening to yourself. Better chance than trying to get anybody else to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
The spilling over thing's been helpful to me with that. Just, what you fill yourself up with is what's going to spill over. So if it's compassion and kindness,
Yeah.
that's what's going to spill over. If it's anger and hatred, and that's what's going to, so yeah, you tend to yourself, but then what are you pouring in? What do you, what's going in? Cause that's what's going to come back out
Yeah.
eventually.
There's another pretty cool metaphor about the sage saying to the young brave, as you grow, you'll have two wolves whispering in your ear. The wolf for good and the wolf for evil. And the question is, back from the brave, which one wins? And he says, the one you feed.
Mm-hmm.
So, see, that's the best I can do on short notice here. It has been another amazing hour with the three of you. Thank you for your time and for blessing not only me, but our millions of listeners. Any last thoughts?
Generations back and forth. Yeah, if we go 7 generations ahead and back.
Oh, man,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what.
That'll get you your millions, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Wayne's World, as if, yeah. Well, folks, it's been another wonderful hour. And, quite frankly, there's not much else I would rather do than sit around and have a good time with you. So, folks at home, keep tuning the podcast in. We do it all for you. No, not really. We're kind of selfish about this a little bit. So, and it seems to work out somehow, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yep.
All righty then. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.